The other night, my son was asking me how religions get started. Where does that come from? It was a fun conversation. And it's ongoing. And one of the things that we've discussed is the idea of fairness. How people seem to really want the world to be fair. And he understands this because as a kid, he wants the world to be fair, right? Everyone needs to have the same amount of dessert. No one can have a bigger piece of cake, right? No one can get more time doing this than someone else. Everyone gets their turn sitting in the front seat. And so we talk about how religion seems to answer that in a way. It recognizes that people suffer. And that some people suffer more than others. And that for some suffering, there doesn't seem to be a way out. And so religions offer these narratives, right? One is that if you're very good, then even if you suffer in this life, you'll be rewarded after you die. You'll be rewarded in heaven, for example. Some will say you'll be rewarded in your next life. You'll get a step up. Right? And these same narratives have their counterpoints, which is that if you're someone, especially a person of privilege, and you are not so nice, you might be punished. So even if things don't look fair right now, there's a kind of scale, and the universe is making sure that it doesn't tip too much to one side or the other. It's somehow taken care of. I think about that, and then I think about how many times in my life I was told, usually by an adult, that life isn't fair. And how that was meant to shut down this impulse toward fairness, this impulse toward insisting that things are balanced. So tonight I just wanted to talk about that. And I'll say in advance, not because I have a big thesis about it, not because I have a great twist that I can offer at the end, but because I recognize the difficulty of this. I think especially in this tradition. And by that I mean Zen, not Buddhism. Buddhism, if anything, is, in its foundational forms, very much geared toward fairness. Right? Teachings on karma going back to the time of the Buddha or close suggest that there is a kind of mechanism in the universe by which positive deeds and positive intentions are rewarded, and negative deeds and negative intentions have negative consequences, not just in the world, but for the individual. There is a powerful and popular argument that Buddhism cannot hold up at all without that. Because why on earth would anyone follow these teachings? Why would anyone be kind? Why would anyone be generous? Why would anyone take up this path if there weren't some reward? And yet here we are in a tradition that doesn't use that kind of language, that isn't talking in that way. So I just wanted to talk about that a little bit. there is this idea that we can transcend suffering or we can go beyond suffering. And yet we understand that in this relative plane that there are certain kinds of suffering that seem too big. There are systemic forms of oppression, for example. There are diseases that strike, and we never know why. We never know why one person gets it and their neighbor doesn't. People are born into poverty and people are born into wealth. And again, there is a strain within Buddhism that says all of that can be explained. If you are born into positive circumstances, that is a reward for a previous life in which you did positive things. If you are born into negative circumstances, now you're working through that karma by suffering in the way that you are. Taken literally, if you are a victim of racism in this life, perhaps you are someone who discriminated against others in a previous life. So this is your chance to experience it and work through it and come out on the other side better, more knowledgeable, more skillful, more compassionate. I feel a tremendous resistance to that idea. And at the same time, I do see how, especially in ancient cultures, where there was no chance of upward mobility, there was no chance that your life was going to change in meaningful ways between birth and death, that these teachings could be beautiful. They offered a glimmer of hope, a reason not to give up. Those people knew that in their lifetimes nothing was going to change, but maybe they could lay the foundation for the next. We don't talk much like that now, and I'm glad. And at the same time, we still have forms of suffering that don't just go away, and that we can't just transcend through will. You know, if you are someone who suffers from racism or from sexism, you can do things to address that. And if you live long enough, you may see it change dramatically even. You may see it get much better. But if you're alive today and those are your circumstances, it's highly unlikely that you will ever live in a world where it is not part of your reality. Sadly. It's too entrenched. We have a cultural narrative that, you know, if you're born into poverty, you can find a way out. If you work hard enough, if you have the right attitude. There's not much evidence for that, though we love the exception to the rule. And so even today, I understand the appeal of this story, that the universe might offer a kind of justice. It might offer a kind of fairness, just on layaway. And how that offers something powerful. I don't want to downplay that. But I also want to consider the possibility that there is something in between life isn't fair and a conception of the universe in which it fundamentally is. when we start imagining that the scales can be balanced, we're imagining that the world makes sense according to our idea of sense. We're imagining that things have reasons. Ask yourself where you are with that. It's a hard one. I have known people who found themselves with terminal illnesses, who lost children. And the question that they woke up with every morning, and the question that they carried with them to bed every night was, why? And that question comes from an assumption that there can be an answer. That there can be a reason why one person gets sick and another doesn't. That there can be a reason beyond physics, beyond chance, why that car turned that corner at that time. Within that question is an idea of order. It holds within it the hope that things can be right again. I've noticed these days, we're still in a pandemic. People are dying. People are getting sick. In some places, it's worse than ever. And yet, because certain things have happened, we've reached certain milestones. People are starting to talk about the pandemic as if it was in the past. We're starting to process it now. Looking at what it did, two things stand out. One is the suffering that it brought to some. People who lost family, who lost friends, who lost their own health, who didn't die from this, but who now have permanent lung damage, for example, and will never breathe freely again. People who lost their jobs, lost their careers, lost their homes. People for whom this has been a complete disruption. And then others for whom it was the opposite. They didn't know anyone who was directly harmed. They didn't lose their jobs. They didn't lose their homes. Maybe they saved money because they didn't go out so much. They're coming out ahead. And some of those people talk as if they talk from a kind of guilt. They know it isn't fair. It isn't. Like I said, I don't have a way to tie this up with a bow. world isn't fair. Life isn't fair. Part of our relationship to that, I hope, is trying to make it fair. It's seeing the places where we can touch that, where we can change that, where we can move it an inch. Part of addressing it, part of growing up, is also accepting it. And again, as we've talked about many times, not in the sense of saying it's okay, but really sitting with it, really acknowledging that things are this way, that we are a part of it. Some of us may feel as if we're always getting the short end of the stick. Some of us may recognize things just seem to work out for us for no good reason. And so we try to share, we try to notice, we try to shift. But even that's a privilege. I don't know. This is the conversation I'm having with my son. And it's the conversation I'm having with myself. And now it's the conversation I'm having with you. And for me, it just ends in a question mark. But I'll stop there. Thank you.